Welcome back. The Commandant of the Marine Corps, General David Berger, has the first published update to his Force Design 2030. General Berger says divesting legacy systems is only one part of building the service he'll need in 9 more years. Colonel James McGinley, U.S. Marine Corps retired, is co-chair of the Marine Corps Affairs Committee at the Navy League. Colonel, welcome. Thanks very much for coming on the program. What's your takeaway from the update to Force Design 2030, sir?
Well, good morning, friends. I think probably the most important takeaway is the openness that the Marine Corps has shown to innovation. You see that a lot of that comes out of the immediate experimentation and feedback that they're receiving on some of the original proposed changes that were focused on in the original Force Design 2030. So I expect that they will continue to iterate and will continue to experiment. And some of this will be, as they move forward, a continuing feedback loop, a little bit like what you've seen out of Silicon Valley, where you have a version 2.0 and a 3.0. It looks as though the Marine Corps is heading toward annual updates so that people will stay abreast of developments as they occur.
What do you think the influences will be on each of those future iterations? We talked a little bit before we went on the air, and you said the how and the why are what you think are really important here. What are the hows and whys that might influence the way that version 3.0 looks and the way the version 4.0 looks as time goes on, sir?
Well, I think probably at the most critical part of this is the underlying analysis of the threat. At this point, you'll notice that there's language where it's really basically lays out the notion of an adversary, maybe a peer threat or a pacing threat. A lot of that is just basically helping people understand that if we are focused on the People's Republic of China, it's the hinge point with the PRC is the Chinese Communist Party. They are not well linked with the people. And so the most effective capacity to push for change comes in destabilizing influences, which allow the people to move away from what is essentially one of the most brutal dictatorships that is out there as a continuing threat. That comes back into the threat to the United States across the entire spectrum. You might remember that they wrote, a couple of colonels wrote unrestricted warfare. And what they were thinking is you use not just a whole of government approach, which you hear about in the United States, but every economic lever as well. And so in trying to deal with that, the Marine Corps has to look at, and I think it's a very significant, critical inward look, what's our capacity to take on a sophisticated threat that may have a real capacity across the electromagnetic spectrum, that may be able to interrupt supply lines, and that may be able to find, fix, locate, and target with long-range precision fires a lot of our major platforms, which then requires those platforms to stay out of a threat engagement zone. And that, I think, is probably the most significant part of 2030 is how do we adjust current tactics, techniques, and procedures for a very sophisticated long-range threat.
Given that that long-range threat has the ability to change on an ongoing basis, should we expect to see maybe written updates to 2030 on maybe a more than annual basis? Or does the Marine Corps have the license and the latitude to refine it as time goes on and maybe not publish that as a formal update? I mean, it strikes me that since the Chinese government can do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, given the nature of its structure, that agility that you're talking about there seems to be a tremendously important element.
I think it is, and I think that part of the experimentation is that feedback. So you take and work through different concepts and then actually take them out the field, try them out, see what works, see what doesn't. Understand that the Marine Corps is probably better structured for skirmishes by their international or geopolitical approach. The Chinese Communist Party likes a bullying effect. So the question becomes, how do you take and push back? What can an American command structure particularly what are the options that the president has in that Pacific theater to take and essentially provide enough domination, enough destruction, and enough input to show the Chinese people that the course being taken by their government is essentially unsustainable. And so that's where you see the Marine Corps looking at long-range precision fires itself. And what's different there, I think, is the idea, if you've gone back 10, 15 years ago, that Marines were looking at anti-ship missiles, and now they very much are, and are looking for that kind of support as they change what's basically in the inventory to provide an asymmetric threat for Chinese bullying.
We have about 30 seconds left, Colonel. In the context of the idea that you expressed about informing the Chinese people, and not necessarily pertinent to this document, but to documents like this in general, is it more important that a document like this demonstrate how the United States wants to deter war, or how it intends to win a war, or maybe it's a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. I think that if we have pacing threats that understand that we are not accepting a static configuration, it makes it much more unpredictable and increases the risk of taking action. So ideally, it operates to deter. In the event that there is a need for U.S. action, typically through a geopolitical lens, if the nation commits its army and its air force, those large muscle moves look very much like the country went to war. Oftentimes, the Marine Corps can have a very significant effect, but also allow the interpretation that the president needed options rather than this is heading towards major theater war. And so the Marine Corps is uniquely, I think, situated to provide that kind of option for a command structure, as well as not have it carry a message that escalates, allows us to respond, but not have the response not be misperceived as an escalation.
Colonel, thanks very much for joining me today. It's great to have you on the program.
I appreciate the opportunity, and have a great day.